for the year ahead and the filing season that is winding down later this month. Mr. Commissioner, we also want to tell you it's going to be a hectic hour and a half or so because Senator Crapo and I will be running back and forth. We led the effort to revoke normal trade relations with the Russians to reduce Putin's ability to fund his war machine. So we want you to know we intend no discourtesy, and thank you for your help in arranging. Thank you. Around the country, millions and millions of families are feeling the pressure of rising prices. This year in particular, people are counting on getting their tax refunds to help cover their bills. So I'll cut right to the matter, the heart of the matter, for those families whose refunds may be delayed due to IRS backlogs. If you're frustrated by poor customer service from the IRS, you have years and years of Republican cuts that have contributed mightily to the ability of the agency to meet your expectations. And for all the talk about running government more like a business, an awful lot of Republicans want to turn the government into the kind of dysfunctional business that never gets a repeat customer. The fact is, Republicans had an opportunity when they passed their big tax law in 2017 to fix the Internal Revenue Service comprehensively. And they could have included efforts to reduce backlogs and improve service. That just wasn't done. In fact, more complexity to the tax code was added, and it made the tax system even more difficult to manage. This came after a long period of Republicans squeezing the IRS budget. It was clear at the time Republicans were steering into a train wreck, and you're seeing the effects today. The number of revenue agents at the IRS, and these are the people who audit tax returns, is clearly a third of what it was a decade ago. The officers who collect unpaid taxes are down by nearly a half. The agency has the same number of employees it did in 1970, when the country's population and the economy were a fraction of the size they are today. As of late March, the IRS was facing a backlog of 12 million tax returns. Service agents struggle to keep up with the phone calls. So far this year, they've been able to answer only 11% of them. The IRS has recently been on a hiring mission, and that's thanks to funding and hiring authority passed by Democrats. The agency makes progress on the backlog in targeting resources at customer service and phone lines. But in the meantime, law-abiding taxpayers dealing with the after effects of the Republican cuts are left with the impression that the government cannot manage a two-car parade. With that said, not everybody is pained by what is happening at the IRS. Customer service has fallen off, but tax enforcement is in even worse shape, which means that these are high and good times for wealthy tax cheats. The IRS is just totally outmanned against the tax cheats who use these complexity-driven loopholes to cheat their way out of paying their fair share. There are fewer revenue agents working today than at any point since World War II, but the challenge they're up to is much bigger. Some of the murkiest, most loophole-ridden parts of America's totally busted tax code is partnership income. It's a thicket of super complicated rules that are supposed to apply to a third of all business income in America. It's a big and growing percentage. In fiscal year, the IRS examined barely more than 0.1% of partnership tax returns, the tiniest sliver. Meanwhile, new research from UC Berkeley found that the working poor are 12 times more likely to face an audit. So look at the big picture. As a result of years of Republican budget cuts, IRS customer service is struggling at best. Wealthy tax cheats get away with breaking the law, and the burden of tax enforcement gets shifted onto working people who spend every day walking a tightrope. Now, Democrats have begun to reinvest in taxpayer service and enforcement to cut down on the cheats and make tax filing season less of a headache for everybody else. Part of that ongoing process, in my view, ought to be making it easier for Americans to file their tax returns directly online for free. Give them that option. Taxpayers are paying huge sums to file their taxes through private companies, and some of those companies use deeply deceptive practices to steer them away from free options that they have a legal right to use. I've been a longtime supporter of the right to file directly with the Internal Revenue Service online. Again, it would be your right, your option, and use a simple return in which your forms show up completed, and all you got to do is check the numbers. It's past time for Congress to tell these prep companies they no longer have a free pass to turn ripoffs and deception into profits. Wrapping up, Commissioner, I want to thank you and your frontline staff specifically this morning. They have putting in some long hours this filing season to particularly get these refunds out in a timely way. They're not people thinking about politics. They're thinking about helping people. And the people need those refunds, particularly right now when we're dealing with this inflation challenge. My view is the job for those frontline folks has been made a lot harder than it had to be. It could have been easier with additional resources and additional assistance. We're going to be pursuing that, as you know, in the days ahead. We look forward to your views. And let me recognize my friend, Senator Crapo. And as we said, we're going to be running back and forth, and we're used to it, but most other people will think it's a little bit odd to have everybody running a shuttle program, but we got to handle this vote. Senator Crapo, good.
Well, thank you, Senator Wyden, and I agree with your observations. We will make this work. And Commissioner Rettig, we appreciate having you with us, and I know you can cover it, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here and testifying today, and thank you for your service. I appreciate your efforts to make the IRS a more customer-focused place and understand that it is hard to change course of an institution like this in just the few years that most of us have to work at it when we get the opportunity, and you've done a good job. There is a need to change course, but I do not believe the administration's outsized partisan approach is the solution. For the third filing season in a row, taxpayers confront vexing customer service challenges as they attempt to fulfill their tax filing obligations. With tens of millions of 2021 tax returns still to be filed, the most recent data we have on this year's tax season is concerning, highlighting long-standing issues that the IRS has not yet adequately addressed. For example, more than 60% of the millions of items taxpayers' correspondence and amended returns have sat in storage for more than 3 months, an increase of nearly 30% over last year. Average hold times for the lucky few taxpayers who reach the IRS by phone are 28 minutes, an increase of nearly 50% over last year, and scores of taxpayers have seen refunds delayed while their return is suspended for various reasons. Millions of prior year tax returns await processing. The IRS's management of paper-filed returns is a persistent problem that the National Taxpayer Advocate recently noted goes back decades. By tax day this year, millions of paper-filed 2020 tax returns will not have been processed, while millions of current year tax returns will likewise gather dust. Steps to prevent or minimize this disruption were not taken by the IRS, and in some cases still have not been taken. For example, many people may not be aware that in order for the IRS to process a paper-filed return, each entry on the return is manually inputted by an IRS employee. These taxpayer-funded employees would be better able to serve taxpayers by answering phones or responding to correspondence. This is not simply a problem of taxpayers choosing to deluge the IRS with paper-filed returns. In many cases, IRS forms and schedules simply cannot be electronically filed, including where a taxpayer could e-file and attempts to do so, but is rejected by the IRS's confusing digital signature process. This is not a funding issue. Solutions to these challenges have existed for years, but to date have not been implemented. The IRS can further transition away from mandating any return or form to be paper filed. With respect to rejected e-filings, which I understand to be often caused by taxpayers being unable to locate or recall one of two possible e-filing PINs, the IRS could implement additional means to e-sign a return. And I'm aware that the IRS, with your leadership, Commissioner, is working on this. The so-called 2D barcodes, much like the supermarket barcodes that have been used for decades, could eliminate the IRS's need to transcribe paper returns at all. Solutions like these have been held up for years with no clear reason why, leading to results that the National Current Taxpayer Advocate Aaron Collins calls crazy, and I agree. Now, to the question that has been raised by a number of my colleagues on the other side, trying to blame Republicans and the budget of the IRS for this. Some say that the IRS budgets are to blame for all that ails the IRS, but this misdirection distracts from real issues at the IRS. It also cherry-picks data to paint a misleading portrait. Many begin their analysis of the IRS budgets beginning only with fiscal year 2010, which was a 30-plus year high water mark for the IRS's budget and an outlier. Viewed in the longer run, the IRS's average inflation-adjusted budget is much lower and is in line with recent years that meet this average. The efforts to try to claim that Republicans have slashed the IRS budget are simply not accurate. Budget arguments are also often invoked in attempts to justify massive IRS funding for things that do not address the customer experience problems plaguing the IRS. For example, some advocate for increased IRS funding to generate revenue through heavy-handed enforcement. This year's presidential budget request seeks a large enforcement funding boost, and its reserved fund placeholder for the reckless Build Back Better legislation would provide a truly massive $80 billion infusion of mandatory funding primarily focused on enforcement. The reserve fund could also accommodate the administration's chilling proposal to monitor Americans' bank account flows of as little as $600. I strongly oppose forcing community banks and credit unions to report sensitive and private customer data of law-abiding taxpayers to the IRS in order to raise more money by snooping through customers' accounts, and will continue to aggressively push back on any attempts to add this reporting scheme to the legislation. I remain concerned about huge funding boosts that would increase audits on small businesses and middle-class Americans rather than prioritize taxpayer services. Our hearing in February had a positive dialogue spotlighting IRS customer service challenges and solutions, and I have a number of questions about ways to address the long-standing IRS problems that I think we can agree on, such as outdated IT and ways to ensure the next filing season will be much better than the last several. Given your stated commitment to making these improvements, Commissioner, which I not only appreciate but accept, I look forward to continuing to work with you on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, and he and I often, after we hear each other's statements, go back and forth a little bit. And I'm only going to say one very quick thing. I think Senator Crapo has a very good point with respect to these barcodes and ideas like that. What I also feel is that the agency is being asked to do more with less. And at some point, when you try to do more with less, you simply get less with less. And I think that's what all these people waiting for refunds and the like are dealing with. So we'll have this back and forth, and you can tell both of us feel strongly about these issues. Our witness today is Charles P. Rettig. He's the 49th Commissioner of the IRS. He previously was a highly respected law partner for 35 years, representing thousands of taxpayers before the IRS, the Department of Justice, Tax Division, federal and state courts, and state taxing officials. He served as past chair and member of the IRS Advisory Council. He also served as chair of the taxation section of the State Bar of California and served on the advisory board of both the Franchise Tax Board and the Board of Equalization in his home state of California. Please go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's FY23 IRS budget, as well as current status of the 2022 filing season. As you know, for fiscal year 21, gross receipts of the Internal Revenue Service were approximately $4.1 trillion, representing approximately 96% of the gross receipts of the United States of America. A successful, fully functioning IRS is important to the continued success of our country. We've been at the forefront of successfully providing rapid economic relief to taxpayers, issuing more than $1.5 trillion in combined economic relief and individual refunds during the pandemic. The President's fiscal 23 budget is a proposal for $14.1 billion, representing an increase of $2.2 billion. The budget would allow the agency to take important steps forward in improving taxpayer service, modernizing our systems, and ensuring fairness in the imposition and enforcement of tax law. The President's budget proposal also supports oversight of high-wealth individuals, that we stay current with our paper inventories, that we accelerate the development of digital tools, which would obviously reduce the paper inventories at the processing that you've described. The President's legislative proposals also provide for oversight of paid tax return preparers. This has been an issue since about 2013. Personally, I would say it's critical for us to receive some form of oversight with respect to return preparers. There are other legislative proposals in there that are important that we can certainly discuss at another point. With the signing of the recent omnibus legislation on March 15, providing the IRS with a fiscal 22 budget of $12.6 billion, we are adjusting our ARP spending plan, which we previously delivered to members of the committee on February 12th. We will adjust with respect to the funds that we have, the movement of those funds, implementation projects that were referenced in the plan that we provided, and we will be moving other funds to cover other remaining short and long-term shortfalls. As of April 5, we have obligated $911 million of these 3-year ARP funds to maximize taxpayer service, and it has been eventful. Taxpayer service remains the most significant IRS priority, and funds provided by Congress, including ARP, have allowed us to implement many new innovative strategies to reduce our unprecedented current and projected inventories and to get healthy, which is our commitment, by the end of calendar year 2022 and before the beginning of filing season 2023. With respect to our current 2022 filing season, we are off to a healthy start in terms of tax processing and the operation of our IT systems. Through April 1, we have processed more than 89 million returns, issued more than 63 million refunds, totaling more than $204 billion. However, there are essentially two distinct filing seasons. Taxpayers who choose to electronically file, who request a direct deposit, are receiving their refunds within approximately 21 days. Many individuals have received those refunds within 3 or 4 days of the submission of their electronic file. With respect to taxpayers who submit paper returns, our processing is first in, first out. We are processing approximately 2.7 million returns still that were received in calendar year 21. And so taxpayers who during this filing season choose to file a paper return end up at the end of that particular stack, and I'm sure we'll be discussing that. And though I want everyone to know that the employees of the IRS, including myself, but specifically our employees, are doing the best we can. We may not always have gotten it right, but we have tried our best. We have put taxpayers first as the #1 priority, and I believe that following my term, the agency will continue to head in that direction. Our mitigation efforts as to our inventories are working. They are making a difference. We are trending in a very good direction that will allow us and allow me to commit that we will be healthy by the end of calendar year 2022. We're working to make sure that these inventories are addressed as quickly as possible and have implemented many new, innovative strategies never before used within the Internal Revenue Service. I believe that most every commissioner over the past decades has stated that inconsistent funding is among the most frustrating experiences for the federal agency that touches and serves more Americans than any other government or private sector organization. Modernized technology would significantly improve our ability to respond to a crisis, pandemic-related or otherwise. It is simply unacceptable for us to remain largely a paper-based organization operating in a digital world environment. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of this committee, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, last year I asked you about the current tax gap, and I was concerned, still am, that it's higher than the official estimate, which always seems to be outdated. So when I asked about it last year, you said the tax gap could be $1 trillion a year. Nobody needs to go over that again. So the Congress needs updated information about the size of the tax gap, who's cheating, what the agency is doing about the problem. So my first question to you is picks up on last year's question. Is the IRS going to start producing more up-to-date tax gap estimates that give us more information about who is cheating?
Yes, sir. When I got on board in 2018, we released the tax gap estimates for 2011 to 2013, which was more of a paper world. Virtual currencies didn't exist. And so we then began implementing the ability to be more current and to actually be more engaging with respect to emerging issues. This summer, we will issue tax gap for 2014 to 2016, which I would submit is also somewhat dated in 2022. But we will also be submitting...
It's certainly dated, Commissioner, so please go ahead and tell us.
We will also be submitting projections for 2019. Know that the tax gap estimates that we submit for 2014 to 16 and the projections will again not include information with respect to virtual currencies and certain foreign source income. We're working to get that information. We're not where we need to be.
Is there anything that we can do working with you that can get us more updated projections? Because I think that's essential for a lot of the debates that we're having here, wealthy tax cheats, a variety of others. What else could we do, this committee, in a bipartisan kind of way to get better data through these updates?
In working with the Department of Justice on John Doe summons activity with respect to a variety of different exchanges, we are aware of a significant non-compliance from a reporting perspective in the virtual currency world. Information reporting in the virtual currency world is improving. It's definitely not where it needs to be. And there's a huge question as to what the aspects of that is. There was $14 trillion in transactions last year in that space. And the U.S. represents somewhere between 30 and 40% of that if you compare our GDP to the world.
So you want additional resources to go after scams and rip-offs and the like, because I've made the point, we had the debate about cryptocurrency last year. I'm all in the fight against these wealthy cheats and people who are money laundering. I just don't want to go after the innovators, the coders and the like. So we can talk offline about this, but I just want to make sure that we get better and more current updates, because that's what this committee needs to deal with major policy questions. Timeline to eliminate backlogs. We talked a bit about this, and I think I'd really like to get your sense here. In your view, what is a reasonable level of phone service, and when will the agency reach that level?
The President's budget proposal for fiscal 23 requests $389 million with a target level of service of 85%, so answering 8.5 out of 10 calls. Every IRS employee would like to answer 10 out of 10 calls, and the surge in incoming volume of phone calls has obviously had a huge impact, and I think you're all aware at one point we were receiving phone calls at the rate of 1,500 per second, 1,500 calls per second, and that built up such an inventory and a backlog, and we've never recovered from that.
So what's a reasonable
85%.
What's a reasonable expectation for Americans on phone service?
We need to crush our inventories, our paper inventories. We need to crush our return backlog, because the folks who answer the phones also process paper. So when we can get through the paper, we can get all those folks full-time back onto the phones and handling it. And we're committed to getting into that position by the end of calendar year 22.
Let me do one other one. You and I have talked about technology, policy, and this has been a focus of my work. I showed up in the Senate where basically nobody was using a computer, and I understand the backlog is due to a great extent to the fact that the IRS employees have to transcribe paper returns manually. So when, in your view, can we expect the IRS to start using scanning technology to transcribe individual tax returns? And how does the president's budget affect that?
The president's budget supports our ability to scan and electronically convert paper into something that we can actually do machine readable and hopefully process automatically. I should say, with respect to the 2D barcode, the congressional budget justification for each year between 2013 and 2017 requested funding for 2D barcode, and that funding was never provided, and the agency then pivoted into focusing on electronic filing, and we're currently running around 96% e-filed income tax returns in our current filing season.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Let's go to Senator Grassley next.
You know, all over the country that taxpayers are at wits' end this time of the year. I think there's been some improvement from the cases that my staff in Iowa forward to the IRS, because in 2021 it took 570 days to get an answer on average, and it's down now to 245 days. But so this brings up the question about IRS employees working remotely. We've had the National Taxpayers Advocates say something along the lines that it's time for IRS to require all hands on deck. I appreciate that the IRS recently unveiled a return to work policy, but you know, for Iowans who have been back to work for a long time, probably for a year and a half, why have the IRS won't be fully back until the end of June? Could you explain why that can't be right now?
I certainly can. That's not accurate. 99% of our employees have been working since June of 2020.
At their office?
Sir, before the pandemic, a significant percentage of IRS employees were teleworking, and we have a union contract with NTEU, and we negotiate that contract every 6 years, and we follow the terms of that contract, and it requires telework-eligible positions to be teleworking.
You may be right in regard to the 99%, but your plan says that it isn't going to be fully deployed until the end of June.
Can I address that?
What?
Can I address that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So 53% of the employees are in a full-time telework capacity. The rest of the employees either have a blended capacity or they're on site. Every employee who has interaction with respect to what's the major issues, the inventory, submission processing, and accounts management, they came back in June 2020, socially distanced environment, in our principal campuses in Ogden, Kansas City, and Austin, Texas. There were occasions where, because of COVID spikes and following the CDC, we needed to shut down briefly, but our frontline processing employees have been on site in place since June of 2020.
Okay, the IRS has spent $5.4 billion on IT modernization since 1999, yet we're still using systems that go back to the 1960s. In 99, IRS started working on what they call the CADE system, which was intended to replace one such system, the individual master file, IMF. However, after spending $400 million, IRS abandoned this project in 2009. In its place, IRS began CADE 2 with plans to replace legacy IMF system by 2014. According to GAO, after spending $1.5 billion, CADE 2 is now expected to replace core functions of the IMF only and not get that complete until 2013. So given this history, how can Congress have any confidence that additional funds will result in the IRS successfully replacing its 1960 era systems?
As you know, I came on board in 2018. In 2019, we launched our business modernization plan, actually April 16 of 2019. a 6-year plan, $2.3 to $2.7 billion. At the same time, major financial institutions were spending 10 to 14 billion per year to modernize their systems. As of today, we've only received 57% of the funding of that plan. And that plan was actually reviewed by outside consultants, McKinsey. Our initial plan was revised and adjusted in accordance with the comments from McKinsey, and they continue to be involved, and we have and welcome oversight. I've always welcomed oversight and interactions with every member of the Hill during my term, and I'm convinced whoever would follow me as commissioner later this year would do the same. As to how people can have confidence in the Internal Revenue Service, we were the agency called upon to issue his 3 rounds of economic impact payments, at least 6 payments on the advanced child tax credit. We issued $1.5 trillion during the pandemic, more than 200 million advanced child tax credit payments. And, I think if you look at what we were able to do, and we were able to process electronically filed returns during this same period of time, I think people should have confidence in us. We were the agency that stood up for this country and supported Americans who for the first time were either unemployed, had health issues, and the rest. And our employees are very proud, and we're privileged to have that opportunity, as am I, to be on board with our employees. But if you look at what we've done recently, I think that people would be impressed. I am not saying that IRS should be funded and then just Congress should go away. I'm saying that IRS should be funded as and where Congress approves and bring us oversight.
The time of the gentleman.
We'll submit some questions for Ray.
Very good. I'm going to submit something as well, because on this point that my colleague from Iowa has offered up, that the agency cannot be trusted with an increase because, in his view, it's wasted billions of dollars of IT funding, is not in line with what the Government Accountability Office has said. The Government Accountability Office has said is between 2019 and 2020, a lack of funding delayed IT upgrades 5 times. And this is not by people in politics and all the rest. This is according to the Government Accountability Office, and I'm going to put some documents into the record on that point as well. All right. Next will be Senator Carper, who I believe is online.
Here. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, and after Senator Carper, we will go to, in order of appearance, Senator Menendez.
Yeah.
Senator
Mr.
Carper.
Chairman?
Yeah.
I could not agree with more fully with what you just said about GAO. We ought to listen to GAO on this front. They've got it right, and we should take their advice and counsel. We've got a couple of questions today. Commissioner Reddick, welcome. We're delighted that you're here before us, and our thanks to you and your team for all that you do for our country. My first question deals with multi-year funding for the IRS. For over a decade, I've sounded the alarm on the need for greater investments in the IRS. Today, the agency relies on a depleted workforce and generations-old technology, causing frustration and confusion for taxpayers. And these challenges are the direct result of Congress neglecting our duty to fully fund an efficient and effective tax collection system. The result is a growing tax gap that allows wealthy individuals and corporations to, in many cases, avoid paying the taxes that they legally owe. I believe that the fiscal year 2023 budget request will help ensure that the IRS can keep its head above water, but what the agency really needs is a certainty of multi-year funding to address some of its systemic challenges. My question, Commissioner Reddick, is how would long-term funding for the IRS help address the agency's systemic workforce and operational challenges? And how would this funding improve taxpayer services and efficient tax collection? Go ahead.
The agency, like every other federal agency, has been in more than 100 continuing resolutions since calendar year 2001. We received our funding a year ago with ARP on March 11, received funding this year on March 15. It is impossible to build a robust, meaningful technology infrastructure for any agency, for any private sector organization, when we don't have consistent, timely, multi-year funding. It is simply not the ability to do that. The start-stop that this agency receives from a funding perspective, and I'm focused on the technology side of the house, we continually have to push projects off based on limitations and figure out how we can do something. And like I said, for this year and for last year, we got our omnibus funding, with 6 months left in the year. And it's truly impossible to do so.
I agree. Workforce challenges and direct hiring authority would be my second question. In recent years, the IRS has faced tremendous difficulty in attracting and, as you know, Mr. Commissioner, attracting and retaining a robust workforce. Fortunately, the recent omnibus appropriations bill provides direct hiring authority for the IRS to expedite the hiring process for qualified applicants, especially to help process backlog tax returns. Question: how will the IRS implement this new authority? What impact will this have on the long-term recruitment challenges facing the IRS?
Congress rescued the Internal Revenue Service by including direct hiring authority in that omnibus budget for us, and that passed on, I think it was March 15. The next day, we started holding job fairs in our 3 key processing centers, Kansas City, Ogden, and Austin, Texas. A lot of press, individuals showing up to these job fairs with resumes. Over 90% received job offers on the spot from us.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And we can bring them on board between 30 and 45 days, and we are doing so. We have over 22, I think the current count as of this week, over 2,200 people through these job fairs, which is a direct result to getting direct hire authority. Over 2,200 people with the offers, and we're continuing to hold these job fairs. We also held job fairs virtually, and those require a little more follow-up, but we anticipate a similarly high rate of offers, and this is critical to help us with our surge teams, our contractors, and everything else we're doing to get onto the inventories. But
all right, thank you. My third and last question, Mr. Commissioner, deals with economic impact payments. My casework team back in Delaware continues to hear from constituents who haven't received their full economic impact payments. While the recovery rebate credit is intended to solve this issue, many of my constituents, my guests, the constituents of my colleagues across the country, don't know this credit exists, or if they did, or how to claim it. It's especially challenging for our elderly or vulnerable taxpayers who have difficulty accessing, in many cases, online resources and information related to the credit. Question: what steps has the IRS taken or plans to take to provide critical information about the recovery rebate credit to vulnerable taxpayers as part of the current filing system?
We provide that information in multiple languages, and importantly, this Saturday, April 9, and then the second Saturday in May, we're holding open houses at our taxpayer assistance centers for people to walk in, no appointment needed, walk in on any issue, and anybody who has these issues should certainly come into one of our taxpayer assistance centers, and we should be able to resolve it. In many cases where people didn't get it or they got a reduced amount, there were offsets or it went to another location. But I will say that TIGTA, our Treasury Inspector General, issued a report about 2 weeks ago saying that I think on EIP round of EIP 3, we got it 99% accurate, and in May of 2020, they issued a report that we were 98% accurate, and I think that speaks to the quality of the people.
That's great. That's encouraging. Thank you very much to you and your team, Mr. Commissioner.
I thank my colleague, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start off by thanking the employees of the IRS that have been working around the clock to assist taxpayers during exceptionally challenging times over the last 2 years. And Commissioner Reddick, thank you for responding to my and my colleagues, including Senator Cassidy's, bicameral bipartisan calls to suspend notices, allow employees to join surge teams, and implement mandatory overtime at the IRS in order to work down the backlog. Right now, as I understand it, the IRS has 2 main issues when it comes to working down the backlog. And until we address these issues, we're going to have more of the same next year. The first issue is staffing, some of that has been talked about here, and that we need more IRS employees. The second is that the IRS still relies on paper, and this paper needs to be open, sorted, and also manually entered into the IRS systems. It seems to me, Commissioner, one of the ways to decrease the backlog is to hire more customer service representatives, or CSRs, at the IRS, especially the submissions processors. Both the National Taxpayer Advocate and the National Treasury Employees Union have identified that these employees are making less than $37,000 a year, and that, quote, this is competing with the fast food industry with high stress and unreasonable expectations, and this is why applicants, quote, are not beating a path to the IRS's doors. How many submissions processing CSRs is the IRS seeking to hire this year?
And how many have you hired?
Between this year and next year, we expect to onboard 10,000, and we have more, before that hiring, we have more CSRs on board than we have ever had in the history. And normally, a lot of them come on board as seasonal, and a year ago, we extended them to permanent, and we brought on an additional 1,000, about, I'll get it wrong if
So
I
you're
guess.
looking to hire 10,000 over the course of
10,000 more.
and at this point, what do you have on board?
All total, there's different categories for them, so we have submission
So of
process.
this 10,000 that you're seeking to hire, is that still to be filled?
No, it's 5,000 tranches, and I
Right.
talked about, I think you were here when I talked about the hiring events that we're having around the country, and we've made offers for 2,000 of that 5,000. We expect to fill that 5,000 shortly. We're having quite a bit of success in our job fairs.
I'll look forward to hearing that. Let me talk about the second issue, which is paper. The IRS is stuck in the 1960s before the information age. Last year, IRS employees were expected to open the envelopes of over 21 million paper returns that were filed. They were expected to manually process the returns, like this one. This may be a simpler one, but meaning that they had to enter in all of the numbers that a taxpayer writes on this form. This all takes time and is a reason why the IRS is a year behind on working down the backlog. Just how do we fix this? Last week, the National Taxpayer Advocate issued a directive that asked the IRS to work with the tax software industry to implement barcoding and scanning technology for next year's tax season. This would speed up processing of returns, reduce errors, would allow the IRS to reassign employees where they're needed the most, such as answering the phone. Commissioner, does the current budget request include funding to accommodate implementing barcodes and scanning technology for next year's filing season?
First, I would ask you to look, we will issue our response to that directive, and I would ask you to look at that, and we'll be available to discuss it with you in person. Second, I would say with respect to 2D barcoding, in our congressional budget justification for each year, 2013 to 2017, we specifically requested but did not receive funding for 2D barcoding. And then third, the answer is yes. Does the president's budget provide for this? We absolutely need to do better. Absent a pandemic, we would have been in a lot better place with the paper, but we have to balance the same individuals answer phones and do the paper. And the phones, as you know, we received over 400% more calls than ever before.
Right.
So
the bottom line.
But we are headed, and we have had pilots and run pilots, and you'll see this in our response, in this space. There are some technological problems associated with us using the 2D barcode, but we need to get there.
Okay. And then lastly, on February 15, Senators Booker, Cortez, Masto, Padilla, and myself sent you a letter expressing concerns about how the IRS implemented facial recognition technology. In this letter, we expressed concerns about whether taxpayers, especially last-minute filers, like the millions of Americans who will be filing their taxes this weekend and next, would have a meaningful choice whether they wanted to use facial recognition or how their biometric data would be protected. Despite requesting a response on the letter by February 25th, we received a response from the IRS yesterday in time for this hearing. And even though the IRS has allowed taxpayers to opt out of a video selfie and instead conduct a live chat with an ID.me agent, I'm still concerned that taxpayers do not have a meaningful choice here, as many have waited long times in trying to reach an agent. I'm also extremely concerned about the amount of information ID.me collects and stores for every taxpayer that uses his website. As a matter of fact, as ID.me tells me, according to this California disclosure, in its notice for residents, it includes things like age, gender, military veteran status, taxpayer's location, and maybe their citizenship status, where they access the ID.me website. Even though tax returns and tax identity information, including a taxpayer's name, address, and taxpayer ID number, are protected from disclosure or potential disclosure by the IR Internal Revenue Code, the information disclosed in ID.me is not protected. The congressional intent seems to me that was to prevent the erosion of trust in our tax system and encourage taxpayer compliance. So I look forward to working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle that would update this outdated provision of the tax code.
And Senator Menendez, those of us who consider ourselves privacy hawks very much agree with you. So I look forward to working with you and with the commission.
You're the ultimate privacy hawk, Mr. Chairman, so
I
we
think,
look
my
forward
friend.
to working with you.
Okay. Senator Whitehouse, we're dealing with a little bit of the logistics of the Senate. Just ask my colleague, did you have a chance to vote on the second measure?
Yes.
Great. We don't have anyone online. Why don't you go ahead with your questions
Great.
for the commissioner? I'm going to get over there as fast as I can. I think Senator Crapo may have to stay a few more minutes. I'm going to return, and I think I can get there by the end of your 5 minutes.
Great.
So
Thank you very
my
much.
colleague.
If necessary, I'll filibuster.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. My questions all relate to solving the bad problems of secrecy, which are particularly germane right now as we see international oligarchs stashing their loot in secrecy-providing jurisdictions. One of the ways we've cleaned this up in terms of the United States being one of the worst jurisdictions for that kind of evil was with the passage of the beneficial ownership law, which Ranking Member Crapo had such an important role in, along with Senator Graham and Senator Grassley and others. Are you comfortable with the input that you've been able to have into the Treasury regulation process? And do you feel that you'll be able to use it effectively to find tax cheats and people who are hiding against the law?
It's critical that we receive information for what are often referred to as bad actors, both in a civil and a criminal context. The beneficial ownership rules and the regulations are really a Treasury primary issue supported by FinCEN, which is another bureau of Treasury as IRS's. And we are hugely supportive, and we have been engaged.
Good. And you're comfortable with the way Treasury is going about it? You're getting your needs met?
They're my boss, yes.
That's different than
I'm
getting
not
your needs
shy,
met.
and you know that.
Good. Second, with respect to the reciprocal Fatca bill, setting aside the staffing concerns that it creates for you for the additional workload, do you support the passage of reciprocal Fatca, and why?
Absolutely. And when Fatca was passed, we committed to our partners, exchange partners around the world, that we would pass a similar provision with respect to reciprocal Fatca. And it has not occurred yet. And so we are receiving information from them, but U.S. institutions are not providing that information. And so, I am a believer in transparency where transparency is appropriate. And in the Fatca arena, I think that it's proved that.
Great. And then with respect to 501Cs, I have three questions. First, where 501C organizations are allowed to obscure the donors behind political influence efforts, what prevents Putin's influence effort from deploying itself through that vector into our politics?
I obviously can't speak as to any specific individual country or otherwise, but
Putin generically, foreign influence efforts from penetrating our political space using that device.
yeah, the IRS needs transparency in this arena, and this is an issue that predated me coming on board, as many of you are aware, and controlled votes in this room. So we're supportive for getting the information we can and processing that information.
Is the answer a simple one, that if there is secrecy behind political spending, then foreign actors can take advantage of that secrecy just as readily as domestic actors?
And that's what I was going to say. Domestic people could do the same.
Yeah, but foreign actors can as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay, second, the IRS has a so-called 50% rule about how much a 501c organization can spend in politics. I want to hypothesize a not very remote hypothetical, which is that you have 4 affiliated entities, just picking that number. They share the same office, they share the same staff, they share the same board, and one of them gets a check, let's call it, to have round numbers, $1 million. It can spend 50% of that on politics, correct?
That's the principal primary rule as far as the funding,
Yeah.
correct?
And then the other 50%, let's say it gives it to the second affiliate in the same office with the same staff, and it can spend 50% of that on politics, correct?
There's a point in time where I would believe that our, it's out of tax-exempt governmental entities, agents would consolidate if it's really a money circle.
Could you tell me
We
if
would have
that's
to, we
ever
would have to be able to
happened?
identify that there's a relationship.
Could you tell me if that's ever happened? That's a question for the record, because what I
Ask
think
that, yeah.
is that they are organizing so that you get 50% in the first bite, 25% in the second bite, 12.5% in the third bite, 6 point whatever it is in the fourth bite, and when you add it all up, 90% of the money has gone into politics in plain violation of the spirit of the rule, and the IRS, I don't think, looks at that. So please
I could not tell
look
you
at
where
that.
it happens. We'll certainly make those inquiries and make sure that it
That
does
it,
happen.
because if it has never happened, then I'd like to know that.
In the income tax context, it's the step transaction rule, right? As it goes through a whole bunch of steps, those steps are not independent. They become.
And the last piece is that it appears that when there is an evidently false statement in a filing made under the 501c rules, i.e. a plain discrepancy between a filing under oath at the Federal Election Commission and a filing under oath at the IRS, that the IRS has never referred that question to the DOJ to inquire into whether a false statement has been made, and DOJ in return has always insisted on there being a referral, so that in 100 balls have dropped between the second baseman and the shortstop here, and everybody's just pointing at each other. Could you address that, please?
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday, and I would have to be able to confirm never. My belief would be never, but I couldn't, for the record, say never sitting here. But, it's a difficult arena to get those cases.
It's really easy, actually. You just make the referral to DOJ. They put the two statements next to each other. They send it into a grand jury. People ask questions, and if there's a case, they proceed.
DOJ, we interact with DOJ Tax. They are more resource constrained than we are, and they are very selective on what we do refer.
False statement cases are easy. We've heard that from DOJ themselves. It's bread and butter stuff.
Bring them in and let's have a hearing together, I guess, prerogative.
Great, let's do that, because it's preposterous the way this is working
I'm
out
with
right
you.
now.
I agree with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Trying to
Glad
earn
to
the
hear you
trust and
agree.
respect of everybody. We need to be present in all of these issues.
Yeah, and if it's obvious that the two numbers don't add up and they're both under oath, the obvious predication of somebody lying is right in front of everybody's face in public filings. And I think it demeans government when government doesn't act on public information like that that is presumptively false.
Well, thank you. And Commissioner, I'm back, and Senator Wyden is now over voting.
Chairman, I took the liberty while you were away, or ranking member, acting chairman, to appreciate the work that you did on beneficial ownership. That was our first topic.
Well,
and so
thank
I just wanted to mention that the commissioner was very appreciative of what we had done and how that will help him in his work.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your referencing that. It shows there is bipartisan work that goes on around here, notwithstanding what may appear to the public. And one of the other issues that is a bipartisan effort is one that I just voted on and Senator Wyden is voting on. Actually, two of them. The first vote has already occurred. It was a vote on denying Russia permanent normal trade relationships. We passed that with a vote of 100-0. And so now, at least the Senate has gone on record, and we expect the House to pick this bill up even today, possibly, in putting Russia in the same pariah trade status as Iran and North Korea. So at least some other bipartisan good things are happening as well. The bill that we are voting on now, which when Senator Wyden gets back I will leave again to go do, is one to put into statute the ban on U.S. purchases of Russian oil until Russia ceases its aggression. So anyway, let's get back to the IRS. As you know, Commissioner Rettig, I'm interested in examining updates necessary to bring the IRS's outdated technology into the 21st century so taxpayers can get some better service. In April of 2019, the IRS issued its most recent 6-year IT modernization plan, which had a top-line estimate of $2.3 to $2.7 billion. As background, from fiscal year 96 through fiscal year 2021, actual IRS budgets have included nearly $5.6 billion in IT modernization spending. Just a couple of questions I have about this. Is the IRS certain that its 2019 six-year IT modernization plan, if implemented, would bring the IRS IT up to date without the need for further funding?
That plan in 2019, and I may have indicated earlier, was reviewed by McKinsey before it was outside consultants. We were asked to do so. We did so. We actually modified the plan. What was released was the modified plan. Know that the 2.3 to 2.7, at that point, two of the largest financial institutions in the United States had announced that they were putting in between 12 and 14 billion per year to modernize their systems, and they interact with fewer people, obviously, than we do. It was a current plan at the time. As of today, we've only received 57% of the funding requested in the plan. We have taken resources elsewhere for the priorities.
Okay.
But, you know, I'd be remiss if I said that will get us where you want us to be, where we want to be, and where every American deserves. It won't. We need more.
So you may have already covered this, and I apologize for that, but if you could give us an updated plan for what you expect today we need, given what you've already seen develop, that would be very helpful.
And technology advances faster than maybe any other lane that's out there.
Yep.
And so, you know, the idea of the 6 years, you know, at the time I made comments, I believe here, that gee, in year one, by year three, we should be looking at something different in year six, and by year six, we should be, right, you know.
Build that into your analysis, but I would love to, and I understand that. I can totally accept what you're saying there, but I'd like to just see a plan, and so that we can understand what it is we need to fight for in order to get that done.
And we would invite everybody. You know, I've made some tours in certain areas, you know, asking people, help us. If you think we're wrong, not necessarily just Congress, but public statements, help us, help others, help us, let us know what the technology is out there. Now, we use a lot of contractors. You know, obviously, we have about 7,000 internal IT folks and about 6,000 outside contractors. So the hope there is that we're cutting edge for our layers. But, you know, undoubtedly, people are coming up with ideas every day.
All right, good. I appreciate your attention to this, and I just have time for maybe one more question, and it's sort of on data as well. It's on biometric data. As you and I have talked, I'm focused on the IRS's announcement of migration of all existing IRS accounts to requiring further authentication, including with biometric data, and I have two questions. I've received mixed messages about the IRS's plan for the migration of existing account holders that have been verified using the enhanced authentication. For the record, at what point will an existing IRS account holder be required to move to a newly authenticated account in order to retain access?
We have no plan at present to require anybody to move to the current version. And importantly, what I think we discussed yesterday, we have two options available in ID.me. We are looking at other options on a go-forward basis, including login.gov, which right now cannot handle our capacity. And so we're working with login.gov, if we can get, we need about 1,500 transactions per second. They can handle less than 30. So if we can get them up and we can get their authentication levels up, it's critical that we're at authentication level 2 so that we can actually start to open up and provide meaningful online services, self-service for people. Otherwise, if we can't get to that authentication level, we're forced to provide fewer services because security is number one priority in that space.
I just have one quick follow-up on that. I'm already over time, and I would just alert Senator Portman, if you're online, to be ready. You're next. And Senator Toomey, I understand, is the next in line after that. My quick follow-up on that is you referenced that you were looking at possibly login.gov. And as I understand it, login.gov is powered by LexisNexis, which is a foreign data broker and requires the use of personally identifiable information. What is the IRS doing in that context to ensure that any new options will not themselves raise privacy and data security issues?
I couldn't address that today because we're with ID.me, not with login.gov. We can't even get to them handling the capacity, let alone the rest of the issues. So
understood. Well, I just alert you to that kind of issue that I'm going to have looking at.
Our options in this space are pretty limited, but the desire is strong to be able to have self-service portals where those who want to use them can use them for a lot of different transactions.
I agree with
think
that,
that's
by the way. I
important,
think you should expand the number of transactions that people can deal with you in that way. Senator Portman, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And congratulations to you, Ranking Member Crapo, for the great vote we just had on being sure that Russia does not have access to our market. It's a privilege, not a right, under lower tariffs that they can get under PNTR. It was a 100-0 vote, and it was a vote in favor of the people of Ukraine and to tighten up the sanctions on Russia. And I know, although it looks easy, at the end it wasn't. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Enjoyed working together on that. Commissioner, thank you for being with us today. Yeah, you and I had a good conversation prior to this hearing about one of my major concerns, which is the fact that we still have so many unprocessed returns out there. I think we've gone from 76.5 million returns that have not been processed to a backlog of about 11 million returns, 11.5 million as of March 25. That's progress since our last meeting, but obviously we've got a huge backlog. And as you know, I think, as you know, I've talked about it, and I know others have as well, raised this with you. We have small businesses in Ohio, as an example, that are still waiting for their refunds from a year and a half ago. And we have people, individuals telling me, hey, I can't get a loan because I've got to be able to show I have a processed tax return in order to get a loan. So this is having a real world impact out there. And obviously we all have deep concerns about this backlog. As you know, Senator Cardin and I have worked with you and your predecessors on IRS reform, actually for the last decade and a half or almost 2 decades. And our latest one is Protecting Taxpayers Act, which was included in the Taxpayer First Act. We've got another bill we're now looking at to provide additional funding for customer service from the IRS that I think American taxpayers deserve, as well as an overhaul of the individual master file to begin revamping the business master file as well. We would require 2D scanning of paper returns to help prevent future backlogs. It's basically putting a barcode on the returns so you can process them much more quickly. Increase the amount of funding to these low-income taxpayer clinics that are overutilized now. Provide direct hiring authority to help get employees on board more efficiently, which I know you value. We also, as you know, revamped the Oversight Board, which was in our first legislation, Irs Oversight, and require regular reports to Congress and to the Inspector General, and a recommendation for IT audit trails on IRS applications to increase the protection of taxpayer data. Anyway, talk to us about what that would mean. Do you think this would help in terms of addressing the backlog and preventing future ones? And specific question for you, does the current budget proposal include funding to completely update the individual master file?
The current budget proposal does not include sufficient funding to update the master file entirely, and it's been, as all of you are aware, a long-term project for the agency. We need to get there. We are, myself included, but every employee of the Internal Revenue Service, I think every American is supportive of funding and bringing oversight, IRS in the technology space to be able to provide the services that every American deserves. I think, you know, the vote you all had today shows that, you know, we're the greatest country in the world. We should provide that level of service to our people, and, you know, a blend between employees, who I think in the IRS are spectacular, and I can't say enough about the quality of the people and the desire, but we need to provide them the right tools and training and technology. And technology will change the skill sets. So the direct hiring authority, what we use it for, will change as we bring on technology. We are going to ask in the direct hiring authority arena for direct hiring authority beyond what we just received, which is in some of our specialist type positions, the more sophisticated examiners. We have a very difficult time bringing those people on board when they're told it's going to take 6 to 9 months or something to get them on board. So, you know, one of the comments, Senator, that you made about is direct hiring authority in this space, and as we discussed prior to today, will get you what we believe would be critical for us to be able to do what we need to do.
Yeah, we need as we talked about, we need the specific positions that you need direct hiring for, what your priorities are. And I guess if you could just answer my initial question also, Commissioner, do these various reforms I talked about, including the customer service funding increases, but also the 2D scanning of paper returns and overhauling the individual master file, will this help in terms of the backlog?
absolutely help in terms of the backlog and numerous other functions within the Internal Revenue Service. It's critical that we receive this.
Great. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for getting us the
Thank you.
additional information on the specific positions for which you think direct hire is most important. We want to help here, and as you said, it's all about the taxpayer. My time has expired. I am going to issue or give you a question for the record on foreign tax credits. I know you've just released your final regulations on that. I have some concerns about it. Now we'll be following up with you on that. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it. Good luck with the filing season.
Thank you, Senator Portman. Next is Senator Toomey, and he'll be followed by Senator Cardin. Senator Toomey.
All right. Thank you, Senator Crapo. And I would also like to congratulate you on the work that you did to get us to this vote this morning. So well done on that. Commissioner Rettig, I appreciate the conversation we had. I guess it was earlier this week. I do want to follow up on the issue that Senator Portman raised, which is the backlog, because as you know, this is a really big problem, and I'm concerned about whether it's going to be solved and how long it is going to take. I'm concerned about how well-defined a plan is to get this wrapped up, to catch up, to get back to a normal, steady state. And I've got to tell you, one of the real frustrating problems for so many of my constituents is the combination of the backlog, the fact that their return has not been processed, and they can't get through on the phone to any human being. That's a very, very frustrating situation. My understanding is for 2021, only 11% of the calls that were made by taxpayers to the IRS actually were completed. That's obviously just a huge problem. And I've got all kinds of letters from constituents complaining, not getting their tax refund for 2020, even after filing in 2021. I got a letter here from a constituent that says, and this is January 24th of this year, I received a letter from the IRS claiming they did not receive my 2020 tax return, but I mailed my return, the voucher, and my check, all in one envelope, and they cashed the check on April 27, 2021. Now they claim they do not have the return that was with the check. So, okay, I understand mistakes will happen, but you can imagine how frustrating it is when this person then tries to call and has like a 1 in 10 chance of getting through to any human being that they can talk to. So I know you are very aware of this problem, but I would like to just have a little discussion with you about what is in the works, what's going to change, how quickly are we going to be able to catch up both on the backlog, but also on the ability to actually have a human being pick up the phone when a taxpayer calls.
Let me give you some current numbers. As of March 31, individual returns that were received in calendar year 2021, we have 2.7 million. Individual returns received in calendar year 22, we have 2.3 million. So in total, we have just about 5 million individual returns waiting to be processed. When returns fall out, and they fall out for a variety of reasons, failure to reconcile economic impact payment, advanced child tax credit payments, mismatches and whatnot, they move over to our error resolution cases. Last year, at this point, we had 7.7 million returns in error resolution. As of March 31, we have 741,000 returns in error resolution, less than 10%. Our efforts are working. We're trending in the right direction. We will, during the summer you'll start seeing the impact of this. And many people, beyond a telephone call with a live IRS employee, which I keep trying to make the point, the same employee in other times is processing paper returns, inventory, and things that we get in that context.
So could I just follow up on that?
Sure.
Because I'm just trying to understand. What you just said there invokes in my mind the image of a person who is processing tax returns in some form, and then the phone rings and they have to drop what they're doing to pick up the phone. I assume it doesn't quite work that way, right?
Not at all. They're taken off the phones and moved to the paper.
And so that would obviously suggest that we don't have enough people on the phones.
Well,
How much is that
these are the
related
areas that we're hiring, 5,000 this year, 5,000 next year, 2,500 contractors. We've automated the processing. In error resolution, we automated the processing with the ARP money, and we've cleared 7.1 million return recovery credits.
Yeah, look, that sounds like a tremendous amount, and I fully acknowledge, I realize that legislation that was passed made the work much more difficult and complex and added to the backlog. How do you think about what the goal should be regarding the ability of people to speak on the phone, and when do you anticipate a really significant improvement in the ability of constituents to get through?
I'm old school, so I'm more of an in-person rather than an online person. And the president's budget proposal provides funding to have the telephone level of service be at 85%, meaning we would answer 8.5 out of 10 calls. I think that's a respectable figure. We would like to be at 100%. Every 10% in a normal year, non-pandemic, every 10% there is another $100 million. It's an appropriated item. We get X dollars to put this Y amount of people on the phones. And so there's a direct relationship there.
So my time has expired. If I could just, with one final question, and I appreciate your answers, Commissioner. If you got the full budget request appropriated in this next cycle, how long would it be before you're able to answer the 85% of the calls that, as I understand it, your request conforms with?
That budget request is for fiscal 23. I expect us to get to meaningful answering a meaningful percentage of the calls, which I have to hedge, because if we go into another spike in the pandemic, it changes our situation. But I expect us to be at normal, which we refer to as healthy, which is viewed through the eyes of the taxpayer and the taxpayer's experience during calendar year 22. We cannot carry this into calendar year 23.
Will we be above 50% in calendar 22 in terms of phone calls going through?
Historically, and as you are aware, IRS comes up with a budget, it goes to Treasury, it goes to OMB, and so what comes out of the building and then what Congress passes doesn't necessarily always look the same. And sometimes we're told what numbers to put in there. But I think historically the target has been right around 70%. And so that would be the mark that we would try to get to. Okay. Where I would caution is we operate in a fiscal year, not to use our annual level of service, but as you see our trends improving, look to what we will have on a monthly or a weekly basis, because the denominator here is so big that we'll never get off the mark. And we're currently running around 19 to 20% level of service.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Next will be Senator Cardin and then Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Reddick, let me start by just saying thank you to you for your willingness to stay with this challenge. We have put so many additional responsibilities on your plate. So can talk about the 2017 tax bill, can talk about the American Rescue Plan, asking you to do more and more. At the same time, your budgets have not at all kept up with inflation, let alone modernization, which is critically important for a longer period of time than just 2017. So I want to first acknowledge that. In addition, Congress, when it doesn't pass a full year appropriation, you go into continuing resolutions. How can you possibly make the type of investments and planning that you need to in order to deal with the types of questions that we're asking you? So my first point is to say thank you. And I have been with the workforce at IRS. They're dedicated professionals, and I thank them for what they do every day in public service. They're the front line, and we appreciate that. Which leads me to the legislation that you already talked about with Senator Portman. I just want to concur in his comments. The legislation that we've introduced would provide enhancement of IRS resources, because you need resources, multi-year operational plan, because we need to have a longer-term planning on reaching the level that we want to in a modern tax collecting agency. IT upgrades and increased consumer service, that's something that has grown and grown and grown as far as the consumer expectations. You have to have the IT that can meet that. Oversight, critically important. that the taxpayer gets its right return for the investments that they make in regards to the IRS, strategic transformation office so that we can understand what the strategic strategies are moving forward, hiring and flexibility, which is something we've given you some help there. We need to give you more. Low-income taxpayer clinics, that's critically important. And then the last thing, reinstating the authority to regulate paid tax return preparers. All we have to do is listen to the ads that we hear every day of those that are being told they can get something that's too true to believe, and yet many of them are brought into that, and your authority to regulate paid providers was compromised in 2014, and to this date, we still have not responded. I know the chairman has been working on that, and I hope we can get our legislation moving forward along with the paid preparer provisions. I'm going to ask the question, though, about concern, just so I know it's on your radar screen, but I want to do it in this forum. I also am the chair of the Small Business Committee, and we have provisions in the tax code to help small businesses. Quite frankly, I think we need to examine the tax code as to its impact on small companies that generally use the individual tax rates rather than the corporate returns in order to carry out their business transactions. I don't think the individual tax return has been updated to deal with the realities of smaller business entities, and I think that's something we need to deal with. But in the meantime, we have the employee retention tax credits, and we've had a large number of our small companies that have told us they just have not been able to get those credits in a timely manner. I would just ask, among the other priorities you have, recognize that small businesses are at a crisis level as a result of COVID-19, and these employee retention credits are critically important to their survival. And if you can make that a priority, I would certainly appreciate it.
Let me first address your opening comments and my personal appreciation to you and every member of the committee for the appreciation that you've expressed to the IRS employees. This has been a very difficult few years, and it's been my privilege to be here with them during this period of time. The second part that was going through my mind as you were making the appreciation to me personally is not only do our employees watch these hearings, but my wife watches these hearings. So I'll have fewer critiques when I get home tonight because I can say, well, the senator said we're doing okay, right? So, I appreciate helping me out on the home front there. But she's on this journey with me, a significant part of my world, my life, my experiences are not only mine, but also hers. Small business, as you know, I come from a small business environment. My dad had a truck, and as we used to say, two big boys who had to get in the truck when it's dark, and we got home when it was dark, and our reward was we got to eat dinner, as my mom explained to us, that kind of a thing. So small businesses, I believe, are the backbone of this country, that they provide valuable services to real people in real situations, in real communities, in local communities that just are not otherwise available. So the 940s and 941s, 941s and amended 941s, we have actually about 1.9 million inventory on 941s. We have 324,000 of 941Xs, and those are current figures. We are working those on a priority basis. And you're right, we have a number of priorities, but within the priorities, obviously we have to make decisions, and they are at the top of the list with a couple of others, but they're at the top of the list. And we need to earn that trust and respect of everyone, including the small businesses, and we're aware of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. And before you go, I just want to make it clear, I so appreciate what you're talking about with respect to small business. Oregon is overwhelmingly a small business state. You can almost count our larger businesses on both hands. I mean, we really have a small number of larger businesses, so many of the small businesses. And in the last few days, I've been struck how many people are just coming up to me and saying, we really want to see this employee retention tax credit, because they like the fact that this is a kind of win-win kind of arrangement that creates an incentive for people to pitch in, work together at a very challenging time. So I want you to know I'm all in with you. We've talked about this often, and your leadership is much appreciated. Okay. Let's see, Senator Cassidy.
Hey,
and then, Senator Cassidy, because we're going to be going back and forth, I think Then after Senator Cassidy will be Senator Casey, who's online, and we're just going to do our best to keep this going. Senator Cassidy.
Hey, sir, thank you for being here. Last week, the IRS and Treasury announced a proposal to fix the so-called family glitch in Obamacare. Now, the IRS has looked at this in the past and, in fact, finalized a rule in 2013 that determined that whether an employer's offer of coverage is, quote, affordable is determined based only on the employee only rather than family coverage. Now, the law has not changed. But why is the IRS suddenly interpreting a law differently? Frankly, it seems more as if this is what we wish the law to read, as opposed to this is what the law was interpreted as being in 2013. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. My guess is that came from Treasury more so than IRS. Treasury does policy, IRS does administration. But if you submit a question for the record, but also I will get back to you on that. I don't have that information.
So let me ask. I find that almost kind of, whoa, because there's an article in Health Affairs which goes through all the considerations that IRS gave in 2013. This was clearly an IRS decision. So what I think I'm hearing from you is that Treasury has gone this way without consulting IRS?
I can't confirm that it's Treasury. I don't have the personal knowledge. I will confirm what the thinking was and who did the thinking, whether it was us and or Treasury. But know that Treasury is usually significantly involved, and they are the jurisdiction, if you will, for tax policy issues. So if there's been a shift in policy, Treasury would have been involved. I'll have to get back to you. I just don't have the personal knowledge.
I'm just a little dumbfounded because I would have thought that this would have risen to your level since this is such a significant reversal of previous IRS decisions. Okay. Let me ask about something which is near and dear, unfortunately, to my heart, disaster retirement legislation with penalty-free withdrawals. My state has been disproportionately affected by natural disasters. I could give you a list, but I think they're probably very familiar with them. Now, one thing Congress has done in the past to help disaster victims is to allow penalty-free withdrawals from qualifying retirement plans. And so, since many Americans, big chunk of savings in these plans, can we help them with penalty-free? Now, we typically enact this relief along with enhanced casualty loss deductions and other measures. But despite recent disasters in Louisiana, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and other states, to date, Americans have not received tax relief for disasters in 2021, which I don't think there's a policy concern, but a timing issue. Now, Commissioner, we have a bill 2583 with Senators Menendez and Representatives Thompson and Kelly that would make penalty-free withdrawals from retirement accounts automatically after the President issues a disaster declaration. I'm hoping to get this included in retirement legislation that may move through this committee. As a commissioner, given you the certainty as to the implementation of this policy and as regards timing, do you think that would be a good way to go?
Absolutely.
Sounds great. And just to echo that, the tax advocate Aaron Collins talked on February 17th how these last-minute tax law changes present challenges for IRS and for tax software companies. So again, your last statement, I think you would agree with this, but should we have permanent legislation, is permanent legislation generally preferable from a tax administration standpoint?
We are currently programming for filing season 23. We're in 22, so we begin preparation that far out. We got caught here with respect to the March legislation on unemployment compensation being excluded from $10,200 and a variety of other provisions that we did not have the ability to automate our systems. And as a result, it led to more than 20 million returns being pushed into a manual processing. So
that's 20 million returns into a manual processing.
Correct. And then that led to inventories. It led to delays in refunds and the rest. There's a connection between all of this. And I'm not saying it started there. That was one of the issues. But we had more than 20 million. We had 11.2 million return recovery rebate reconciliations. The earned income tax credit ability to use 2019 instead of 2020. We could not automate that. and the unemployment compensation. We could not automate that.
So many of the questions here, or many of the comments, thank the IRS employees for their hard work, and thank you, and express concern about staffing and express concern about backlogs. What I just heard from you is that if we made permanent this legislation that almost always passes when there's a disaster, we would do something positive for the employees, positive for productivity, and positive for backlogs.
And we would implement automatically. There are other provisions that key off of a national emergency declaration. We don't need to consult anybody. We implement immediately. Delaying and filing a tax return, for example.
Sounds great. So, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, I think we have a solution that Congress always passes, but if we made permanent, would help the IRS tremendously and in turn help other taxpayers as regards any backlogs that may occur. So, if, knowing that all states, and this is a Menendez-Cassidy bill, just to put that in your kind of front of brain as maybe something we could include in future legislation.
We'll have the staff follow up with you on that, Senator Cassidy, and I noted that you and Senator Menendez had teamed up, and we need that kind of bipartisanship.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Commissioner, I have to go be part of an effort to make some wonderful history and vote for Judge Jackson. So we now have the good fortune of having our colleague from Nevada who is willing to chair. And then we have a number of senators, a colleague I think already on the phone. I think Senator Casey may be next, but we'll work closely with you. And finally, Commissioner, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it back, I want to thank you particularly for your candor, for your willingness to work with us and to do it in a hands-on kind of way. That's really the litmus test here, is whether people are really going to be hands-on, talk about where we ought to go, follow through. You have clearly met that test, and I really look forward to talking with you in the days ahead.
Thank you. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto to run the hearing.
Thank you. I believe Senator Casey is online. Next?
Yes.
All right, Senator Casey.
Thanks very much. Commissioner, thanks for your time today and for your public service. I'm glad we had a chance to catch up yesterday. I really only have one question in the interest of time, so I should take less than my 5 minutes, but it's an issue that you and I have talked about and our teams have worked together on, and that's letting people know that in the next couple of days, if they haven't already filed their taxes, there are a lot of families that can take advantage of a greatly enhanced child and dependent care tax credit. That's the long version of the name, but most people know it as the child care credit, to be distinguished from the child tax credit, the separate individual tax credit just for child care and related expenses. So as you know, that's available to families now because of the American Rescue Plan. So in the next couple of days, I hope, if we keep promoting and talking about it, that families will take advantage of it. By some estimates, families can have a tax credit that will be 7 times more generous than the tax credit under the current version of the credit. And at a time when families are paying so much for the price of food or gasoline or so much else, this tax credit can be enormously helpful, because one of those big costs, and you know that the cost of childcare has exploded over the last 10 to 15 years. So here's my question. It's just one that you and I have talked about, but one of the frustrations we had was that we thought the IRS, as well as the administration more broadly, wasn't doing enough to promote this credit. And in your team, you and your team responded to that, and we appreciate that. I led a letter with the Democratic senators to the Vice President Harris and Secretary Yellen, urging them as well to be more aggressive on the outreach so that people know about this kind of one-time only opportunity on this particular tax credit before it goes back to the original version of it. So can you tell me what steps the IRS has taken already to make sure that families know about the credit and can claim the credit as they deserve on this year's tax forms?
Certainly, and I appreciate the opportunity, and we're very supportive of the credit, and we're doing our best. I would agree later than we should have been to getting the word out in as many channels as we have. But we issued an information release on March 8th that covered a lot of issues. We've got frequently asked questions, but importantly, we've been very aggressive with social media, YouTube, both in English and in Spanish. And we have taxpayer assistance centers open on Saturdays, this coming Saturday, and then the second Saturday in May. We have community relationships with community organizations, over 18,000 community organizations around the country. By the way, going into the pandemic, we only had relationships with about 3,000. We're now at 18,000. We have relationships with 13,000 public school districts in the country. Obviously, that translates into millions of individual children that this could be impactful for. And we use all of the channels that we have, and we did not have those public school relationships either before the pandemic. But I think it's a tribute to the Irs employees getting out there and figuring out how to get in the communities, get the word out, and we're using all the channels that are available on this as well as the other ones.
Well, Commissioner, thanks. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the days. Literally now we're down to days. And the last thing, I'll just make a statement because I know you and I have already talked about it. I look forward to working with you and the chairman to pass the president's budget request so that Pennsylvanians can get the level of service that they expect and deserve from the IRS. And I know that there are concerns about falling levels of service. I know you're trying to work on that, but you need a budget to do it. So thank you for your work. And Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Langford.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in and for the visit. Let me give you one piece of positive news on this because we're asking you all kinds of questions on issues. I typically e-file my taxes like millions of other Americans. I've already done that for my federal return. Typically when I e-file, I wait hours to a couple of days to be able to get the confirmation back that it's all been received. That took seconds this year. So the change in your system was pretty dramatic of what we've seen in the past. That literally after I e-filed, it came back within seconds, said confirmation done, everything's through. So that part of it is working faster. I know we still have a lot of issues in the call center and getting a chance to be able to answer calls. I want to ask about personnel issues and to zero on this. You were given direct hire authority. This has been an issue I've talked about in my other committees and in this committee as well. You've been given access for 10,000 of those, but I don't know yet what positions you're using those for. So I don't need the exact location of what desk. What's the type of position you're looking for in that direct hiring authority? How are you using it?
We're going to come back and ask for an expansion of that. So
okay.
I always believe in transparency. And
no, that's good. That's fair.
First level is where we have our inventories, which is submission processing and accounts management. And the legislation limits direct hiring authority to essentially the clerks in those positions. They're lower graded individuals, if you will, pay grade wise. And that's what we have authority for. We got authority for 10,000, which is 5,000 this year, 5,000 next year. We have been holding job fairs around the country. We've been very successful in those job fairs. We fully expect to bring on board the 5,000, which will make a difference. We also have other avenues. We're doing searches and stuff.
Do you have individuals that are in the processing center or answering phones? Is that in your direct hire authority, or are those not in your direct hiring authority?
It is. Where we are hiring is Kansas City, Austin, and Ogden, sorry. Okay. And that's where our three big processing centers are. And we're with direct hiring authority. Congress rescued us. There's no question about it. We are able to onboard folks in those facilities within 30 to 45 days. We needed them in December, but without direct hiring authority, we're competing with Walmart. We're competing with Target, which is onboarding at $20 an hour. Our folks are at $15. And we're competing with Amazon. And then without direct hiring authority, we have to tell these individuals it may be 6 to 8 months before we can bring you on board. For these folks, they need that job now. There was a news release recently, a press release out of Ogden. A lady got laid off on Friday, came to our Saturday hiring event and got hired.
Okay.
We're able to move that fast.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. So the onboarding process itself, once you've actually made the hire before they can actually get engaged, actually doing the task, how long is that onboarding process?
30 to 45 days.
Okay.
And individuals are showing up at in person at these job fairs with resumes. We're also doing virtual job fairs, and it takes a little more follow-up to get some of their information. We do the background checks within that 30 to 45, but we can do everything else we need in person at the site, and it's been really superb.
Okay, terrific. You and I have talked before about the attrition rate in certain areas of the IRS, and then also the number of retirees that are out there. So the two questions on this. You've seen a high attrition rate in the processing centers before. How is that going? And the other side of it is there are a lot of folks at IRS that were eligible to retire this year. Have you seen a lot of retirements this year?
So attrition, we have we had hiring freeze from 2011 to 2018, so we have a more experienced workforce on average than probably most other agencies. Attrition is holding true. I will say that the majority of our folks, I think, stayed during this period of time. We're seeing basically a 5 to 7% attrition rate on about 80,000 employees. And some of our avenues, it's a little higher, 10 or 11%, and we're addressing that. Although I will also say that I've been contacted by a number of folks I knew before I came on board at the IRS who were career IRS employees who retired, who have come back as retired annuitants. And so we're getting the sense of, if you will, the IRS community understands that they need to come in and help us pitch out, and they're doing that. So we're not where we need to be, not where you want us to be, but we're getting a better position every day. And,
Do you have data at this point for individuals that chose not to get the COVID vaccine, that retired early, or that left the IRS, what that number is or percentage of the workforce?
We have that. I believe that we were among the leaders in federal service in terms of the percentage of employees who were fully vaccinated. And I couldn't tell you whether that is or isn't, because folks who are leaving now, we don't have that requirement, right?
They got paused, right. So there's no way to be able to know how many folks did leave before based on that.
We did not. To my knowledge, we did not see a noticeable spike in leaving, although it was in the hallways.
Oh, yeah. I would assume, we had lots of phone calls that came into our office saying, hey, I already had COVID. Hey, why am I doing this? Yep. We're grateful the pause is there at this point. We'd love long-term clarification from OPM on what direction they're planning to be able to go on that, because that's still hanging over some folks' heads that have had COVID 3 times since then.
That's all beyond my pay grade.
I get it. Just didn't know if y'all were tracking that number. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe Senator Warner is virtually. Senator, are you there?
Yes, Senator Cortez Master, thank you so much. And Commissioner Rettig, it's good to see you again, at least remotely. And let me start the way so many of my other colleagues did by thanking you and all of the IRS employees for their really diligent and hard work during COVID. And it's got to have been, I know, just brutal. And my friend Senator Langford was talking about what it's done to some of the workforce. But let me also move, as many of my other colleagues have, from the thanks to the enormous burden that so many Virginians are feeling by not getting their 2020 taxes processed. And that's obviously hurt in terms of child tax care payments that get out, other getting their returns on a timely basis. And we really do need to put as much attention and focus as possible. I want to, my first question at least, start on something that I don't think has been raised yet, and that is the EIDL loan process. EIDL is, I'm sure you know, Commissioner, is an SBA program that was utilized a great deal during the pandemic in conjunction with programs like PPP and others. Part of the EIDL process is a company who's going for an EIDL loan from the SBA has to, in effect, give permission to the IRS for the IRS to release their transcript or their tax returns to the SBA so the SBA can process the application. Unfortunately, the SBA has been receiving either no returns or, in many cases, partial returns. Our office has contacted the IRS. Our office has contacted the taxpayer advocate. And the taxpayer advocate says oftentimes the applicant's tax returns can't even be found in the IRS system. If this is the case, we've got businesses who are, in all likelihood, eligible for these critical EIDL SBA loans who aren't getting them because this snag at the IRS. Are you aware of this problem? Is there anything that can be done? And can we have some kind of flagging system within the IRS process to make sure that there's at least some review done, or if a partial transcript is sent over to the SBA, there's some ability to kind of work that out?
If you've got current situations on this, we should talk offline, because we created a workaround for this with the SBA and with taxpayers, where they verify a current filing and then we verify with the SBA. So if you've got people who are hung up in that, my suggestion...
We have a number of people, and we have been in regular touch with the IRS. We've been obviously in regular touch with the taxpayer advocate, but I will definitely take you up on that. There's an awful lot of Virginia companies who are kind of lost in the ether at this point, and if there's a workaround that's actually working, I would love to engage with you on that. So I appreciate that, Commissioner. Sure. In the last couple of minutes, I want to raise the issue of cyber attacks. I know you indicated, I think at your Ways and Means hearing, that IRS is the victim of at least over $1.5 billion cyber attacks a year, and obviously most of those don't get through, so I commend you on that. But as chair of the Intel Committee, I can tell you, and with the war in Ukraine, my expectation is quite high that we will see increased number of cyber attacks, and I still don't believe we've seen Russia's full-on A game. And clearly, in addition to sectors like energy and financial, I think causing more disruption in a governmental entity like the IRS would be high on the Russians' hit list. I know the president's budget increased a bit here, but how do you feel you're doing in terms of cyber protections? And even beyond the president's budget, what else should we be doing to give you the assistance you need?
I'm proud of our employees, and we receive about 2.5 million sophisticated cyber attacks, which generally speaking are nation states a day, 2.5 million a day, and we receive about 1.6 to 1.8 billion per year. We are ever mindful of events that occur not only inside the United States, but certainly outside of the United States. Cyber, I think every commissioner would say, is the primary thing that keeps them up awake at night. It's not only protecting the data, which is obviously hugely significant, but I think that if we got hit in that space, it would be an emotional constraint on the country and the people of the country. They trust us, and we need to be there. I am hugely proud of our cyber folks and our IT folks, and I think you may know that actually this week there was a takedown of a very large dark money site announced by Department of Justice. That was an IRS co-led case. We identified it and led it and worked with the German government for the seizure, and we've been doing those, been announcing those about every 6 months or so when they become public. That's our cyber people, but like every agency, and I'm speaking on behalf of IRS and Treasury at this point, to the extent I can speak on behalf of Treasury as a bureau head, we need resources in the cyberspace. There's more than 470,000 cyber positions available in the United States of America with a 0% unemployment rate. And we need not only to keep the people we have, but we need to continue getting new people. So it is a high alert for us, as I think it is for every American.
Well, as we go offline, I know my time's on the EIDL program, I want to visit with you more on this. I would point out, as you know, there's not your area, but the kind of psychic and emotional hit when OPM was hit a number of years ago by the Chinese. We've not seen their full utilization of that, but really important. And then also, because of all the members in the Senate, we did pass finally cybersecurity reporting legislation. It's the law of the land now. So at least CISA will have that information. But thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Senator.
Senator Daines.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I want to, first of all, start off by thanking the hardworking men and women of the Internal Revenue Service for their tireless efforts. That has been one of the most challenging times, I think, in the agency's history. Your work is incredibly important, greatly appreciated. With that said, Montana taxpayers remain frustrated with unanswered calls, delayed refunds, inadequate customer service. And Commissioner Rettig, as you know, Montana is largely a very rural state. With internet service and cell coverage sparse in many parts of the state, Montanans rely on in-person taxpayer assistance centers to get help with their tax issues. Currently, half of Montana's taxpayer assistance centers remain closed, and I hope that does change in the near future. Moving to some questions. Commissioner Rettig, there are several states that have been successfully implementing IT modernization plans, including partnering with industry to adopt modern practices, state-of-the-art methods. For example, by partnering with private industry in the state of Rhode Island, they were able to, over a period of years, nearly fully integrate its disparate tax systems on time and on budget. The question is, how is it after billions of dollars being spent by the IRS to modernize systems that we've not achieved equivalent results or something close to it? Presumably, states operate under the same pressures of budget hiring the IRS operates under, even if on a smaller scale. The IRS has yet to close dozens of outstanding and unfilled fulfilled recommendations from GAO and TIGTA. So what are your thoughts around how we can get modernized here?
First, many of the recommendations from GAO are historic, and they're ones that the IRS completely disagrees with. So there's a disagreement whether we should go into that space. So they're not being ignored, but it's ones that we've looked at. Second, we've been in, like every federal agency, over 100 continuing resolutions since 2001. It's virtually impossible. And last year we got our budget March 11. This year we got it March 15. It's virtually impossible to build out a viable, realistic technology space when you don't. Right now we have 6 months to do it, and so the start-stop. And if you were to see our IT priority list, it's like 2 font, 60 pages, and we're trying in that space. So that's our continued ask for, multi-year, consistent multi-year funding. Give us a target so we can build out the target. And we'll come up and show you what we want to do, but we can't do it in 6 months. The start-stop just really is not the way it should be for us or anyone else.
I completely agree with your frustrations. It's the most broken and should be the most fundamental process of delivering a budget prior to the start of the fiscal year.
And we spend billions a year just on operation maintenance, O&M, which we got to get there to not be spending that money.
Yeah. I want to talk about conservation easements, Commissioner. You and I have had many conversations about the abusive easement syndications. You know how I feel because I've introduced legislation with Senator Stabenow to outlaw the most egregious transactions. As you're aware, criminal indictments were recently handed down related to some of these syndicated conservation deals, and the IRS is auditing hundreds of other syndicated transactions. Mr. Commissioner, just help my understanding of the state of play here. When looking at syndicated easements, either those referencing the indictments or those that you continue to review through the audit process, are there structural differences in the way a syndicated easement is designed, or are they similar?
The IRS is very supportive of the purpose of the legislation with respect to issues in conservation easements. And what's happened is the abusive syndicated easements have taken those and essentially created a situation where you can pay X dollars to avoid multiple X of tax.
Yeah, and so back on that, what are some of the characteristics of those transactions? If you kind of name 2 or 3 of them.
Enter and leave the transaction in less than 3 years. So I buy in, and often within the single year, and they're targeted toward, if I need to save this amount of tax, I buy this percentage and I can save this amount of tax. Senator Grassley and Senator Wyden held a hearing on conservation easements, and I think if you see some of the information that came out associated with that hearing, it's public information. You would share our concerns as to why we need to devote significant resources to that space. It's not something that will generate trust and reliance of the people on the street, that other people can basically go buy a tax deduction. We're supportive of conservation easements. It's the abusive syndicated easements that I think Congress needs to consider legislation for.
So with those comments in mind, and Chairman Wyden, I know, had a vote, but I want to wrap up by looking back and applauding the investigative report that came out on this issue with Senator Grassley that Senator Wyden did, that really exposed the egregious nature of many of these transactions. And that was prior to these indictments as well that have come out. I mean, these are indictments, and I encourage members of the committee here to go look at these indictments on the fraud and abuse that are going on with some of these syndicated easements. Your report identifies some very troubling issues that DOJ is now highlighting as well. I think enough has happened on this issue that perhaps the Finance Committee could schedule a hearing to dig deeper into your report and figure out as a committee what is going on here and how it can be stopped. And again, as you just articulated, and I want to reinforce, there's so many very legitimate conservation easements. Montana is one of the top leaders in that regard. They're doing it the right way. But there are others that now base these indictments here are fraudulent. And we'll let the court side out what's going to happen there. I know the chairman had to step out, but I guess I want to thank Senator Wyden and his support here, and I hope we can get a hearing on this issue.
And, the hearing would be obviously the prerogative of the chair and ranking member, but we would support that. And not only would I encourage people to look at the information that's in the investigative report, that's in the indictments, We are in litigation with many transactions, and we have taken to amending our pleadings to assert civil fraud penalties in certain of these transactions. That should telegraph where the IRS believes many of these transactions are. The abusive syndicated transactions need to stop.
And as
our efforts have not been impactful from what we're seeing.
Right, and as you and I talked about, it seemed like even though these indictments are coming out, we put folks a warning. There was clear guidance giving out here. 5 years
Thank you,
ago.
Senator Daines.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
All right.
ask you
Thank
to
you.
Wrap it up.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thank
Senator
you.
Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, nice to have you here. Welcome. Since last year's IRS data breach or leak of private taxpayer information in which the left-leaning ProPublica went out on to publicize confidential taxpayer details, there's been no meaningful follow-up from the administration. In your March 8th response letter to finance Republicans, you pointed to Secretary Yellen's testimony that said the Department of Treasury, the Office of the Inspector General, the FBI, and the Department of Justice are conducting independent investigations into this matter. This apparent leak or hack of private taxpayer information is a serious breach of trust between taxpayers and their government, and it is simply inexcusable that the administration hasn't provided any accountability. So my question is, Commissioner, because I think it's a fundamental one, and that is when taxpayers' private information is stolen from the IRS and then shared by a partisan media outlet, how do you think that impacts trust in the agency?
I don't believe it's been indicated that it was actually stolen from the IRS. I don't think there's been anything on that. TIGTA, Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, is the authority as to IRS that has the jurisdiction. So the investigation, and they announced that there's an investigation, so there would be the people to talk to. Hypothetically, any data breach, I think, causes significant reputational risk at a minimum for the U.S. government and specifically the Internal Revenue Service on a go-forward basis. We need to protect, we need to confirm to people that the information that they give us is safe and that they're required to give us is safe. And security of taxpayer information is among the highest priorities, not only of myself, but I think any commissioner who's been here and any commissioner who will follow me.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And so as a follow-up, when do you expect, based on what you just said, the administration to provide accountability regarding the unauthorized disclosure of taxpayer information?
I can speak generally that as most people, I get frustrated when investigations go on without public acknowledgement of what's there. The timing isn't helpful for maybe an agency to say what did or didn't happen and to rebuild the trust, but we don't control the timeline of Treasury Inspector General.
I would hope that you would urge them to complete it in as quick a way as possible, as thorough a way as possible, but obviously so there is some accountability. I hear from a lot of South Dakotans who are frustrated with the IRS. Many are reaching out to my office as their returns are over 6 months behind. Not only are they frustrated with the delay, but with the lack of assistance, as it feels impossible sometimes to reach an IRS representative. When can taxpayers who are still waiting on their 2020 and 2021 tax returns expect to receive a completed return?
We have 2.7 million paper returns that were filed in calendar year 21 in inventory. We have 2.3 paper returns filed in 22 that are in inventory. Those are not necessarily dated because that's our current system. The outdated clearly are the ones that we received in 21, and these are paper returns that are being processed. The over 95, 98% of electronically filed returns are being processed quickly, timely, within 21 days. People who are entitled to a refund get the refund. The ones that fall out, statistic I gave earlier, they can fall out for a variety of reasons. Typically it's a non-matching of two economic impact payments don't add up or something like that, a math error. They fall into our error resolution service. Last year at this time we had 7.7 million returns in error resolution service. Today, we have 741,000, so less than 10% there. A lot of the statistics that I could go through, I won't necessarily belabor our time, but a lot of the statistics confirm that our decisions that we've been making in the last 6 to 8 months are correct and accurate, and that we're trending in the right direction. And I will also say we have tried innovative, creative things that were never tried by this agency before. It's a very risk-averse agency. We did not assume risk to get here, but we took really educated moves to put us there. And I'll be the first to say that every suggestion, I'll put it on myself, of how we can get through this did not work as intended. And so we had to come back. But I will say that to the extent that that occurred, it was with the intent to get this right, and we to get it right quickly. And so the effort and desire really was there. We get the importance of getting, and appreciate it, of getting refunds out to individuals as quickly and as accurately as possible.
Well, and I appreciate your attention on clearing the backlog and urge you to prioritize improving customer service. As you know, the timely, as you mentioned, processing your returns and the ability to talk with an IRS representative are cornerstones to good tax administration. And many taxpayers are trying in good faith to comply with the tax laws, and they deserve a responsive IRS. So keep pressing in that area, because I think it's critical, as we talked about earlier, along with the other issue of the leaks of information, to establish that trust of the American people, and having a responsive tax collection service is key to that. So my time has expired. Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. I want to thank the chair and ranking member for this hearing, and Commissioner, thank you for being here. I want to follow up on an issue that Senator Cardin talked about. I am hearing from small business owners, including an owner of many Dunkin's locations in New Hampshire, who are still waiting for their employee retention tax credit payments. Small businesses need this relief, and now with the tax filing deadline approaching, many employers are facing higher taxes due to the delay in payments of these tax credits. What is the IRS doing to provide relief from higher taxes for small businesses still waiting for their employee retention tax credits?
We have prioritized the processing of the related forms for that, which are the 941s and in some cases 941Xs.
Yeah.
We have in our inventory currently 1.9 million 941s and 324,000 940Xs. We're moving through that quickly, and we've put a lot of employees on there. We have mandatory overtime. We have authorized overtime. We just expanded mandatory overtime to another group to be able to move through that. You're also a logical question is, well, okay, you gave me the numbers, but what's the date? When can I tell people that they're going to get this? I don't have that for you yet, because we have some uncertainties that we're facing. We are bringing people on board. We're training people. We're getting them in those lanes as quickly as possible. And then I always hedge if we got another COVID or this or that, so we're careful about dates.
Right. So I understand that.
Another comment, if I could actually interject. This is not IRS commissioner speak, but some folks might want to put their individual return on extension to October 15. We should be able to get this done before then, and then they could match at that point in time. It's not IRS position.
But the other possibility is that the IRS, of course, has the authority to waive penalties in certain circumstances, so that you could provide that relief, because even with an extension, people have to pay their taxes, right? So that's the question, is whether they'll be penalized.
I'll tell you, 36 years on the outside, I thought IRS was extremely easy to work with from a penalty perspective pre-pandemic. I never really had, if I thought I had a case,
right, but I think it would, look, I want to move on to other questions, but here's the thing. I think it would be very helpful for small businesses who have navigated through so much during the pandemic to actually know ahead of time, not to have to negotiate on an individual basis about penalties, but if they haven't gotten their retention tax credit yet, they should be able to know that their penalties would be waived if they do the calculation as if they got the tax credit that they're owed. So that's just a suggestion, and I'd look forward to
we have a number of penalty provisions we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you. Last week, I'm going to come around to an issue that Senator Daines was talking to you about, too, about legacy IT. But last week, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee passed my bipartisan Legacy IT Reduction Act, which requires agencies to identify their outdated and obsolete technology and publish robust modernization plans to dispose of or update those systems such as the 62-year-old processing system at IRS and its paper-based filing systems. Modernizing these systems could help reduce improper refund payments and address the current backlog of unprocessed tax returns, which has been significantly worsened by the IRS's outdated IT systems. How would IRS use the $310 million that it requested in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget to modernize its legacy tax processing systems to reduce improper payments while also working to get taxpayers their refunds more quickly?
Currently, only about 16% of our systems are outdated. And going back to 60s, we don't use systems from the 60s, but we do use COBOL language,
right?
Which, you know, people say there's 3 people on the planet who understand it. I've not met the other 2.
Yeah.
One works for us.
Yeah.
That's not official IRS response.
Right. Yeah. Yes. We understand the challenge and frustration, and that's what I'm trying to get at. So,
so
how
what
would you
we'll
use
do,
the?
Yeah, let me get to your question, which is what we'll do, which is obviously increase our online, mostly focus on taxpayer service, taxpayer interactions, the portals, update our IMF systems so that they're actually workable among ourselves as well as for taxpayers to come in, and it would be a noticeable improvement.
Okay.
And it's needed.
Right. Thank you so much. I am running out of time as well. I have some additional questions, including about the backlog that people talked to you about on the amended returns, but we'll submit those
And
for
I'm
the
available
record.
for one-on-ones with all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Right now, millions of hardworking Americans are getting ready to file their taxes. But thanks to loopholes in our tax code, for billionaires, paying taxes can be optional. This has to stop. Now, last week, President Biden proposed a new minimum tax to ensure that the very, very rich pay at least 20% in taxes every year on their income. I've long called for a tax on wealth, not just income, of ultra-millionaires and billionaires. The president's proposal is different, but it is a giant step forward. Now, critics claim that the IRS just isn't up to the task of administering a tax like this because it requires assessing the value of complicated assets and doing this calculation for many taxpayers. This is a question about your agency's competence, so I want to ask you about it, Commissioner. In fact, the IRS already has a lot of experience examining the assets of the ultra-wealthy. For more than 100 years, the IRS has valued the property of multimillionaires in order to apply the estate tax. So, Commissioner Reddick, about how many estate tax returns have been filed with the IRS in the last 10 years?
Just under 300,000.
Just under 300,000? All right. And do you know anything about the combined worth of those offhand?
I don't.
Okay. I think the estimate will be well over $1 trillion. Does that make sense?
Not from my private practice experience.
Okay.
I'll go with it.
All right. For comparison, the president's billionaire's tax would only apply to 20,000 taxpayers. Now, the estate tax has got to be generally harder to administer because by definition, it applies to new taxpayers every time it is paid because it isn't triggered until someone dies and an asset is transferred to an heir. By comparison, the president's billionaire's tax would mostly apply to the same taxpayers year after year, making valuation much simpler. Some of the valuations that the IRS already does can be quite complex. In 2020, the IRS completed 1,454 estate tax audits, including 770 estates valued at over $10 million. So, Commissioner Reddick, what kinds of assets do the IRS investigators examine in these estate tax audits that they're performing every year?
The examiners in that space are known as estate tax attorneys. They're sophisticated examiners. They're among our best. And estate tax is based on a valuation at a point in time, date of death, or either 6 months after the date of death. And the examiners look to see if the values were appropriate, if the deductions were appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. In appropriate cases, they may bring in engineers, which are really economists and valuation specialists.
And say a word about the kind of property that they look at and value.
It's the valuation of the assets and discounts people claim for the assets.
So like
tend to be most of the issues.
Mansions, ownership of businesses.
Virtual currency.
There you go. There you go. So the IRS has lots of experience valuing assets like mansions and expensive art and private companies, exactly the assets that would be subject to the president's billionaire tax. But to make anything work, it is critical that we fund the IRS. so that it has all the tools it needs to ensure that the ultra wealthy pay the taxes that they owe. And that is why President Biden's and congressional Democrats have proposed $80 billion in funding for the IRS. Commissioner Reddick, how would additional funding turbocharge the IRS's ability to take on wealthy tax cheats or to administer a new tax on billionaires like the kind that the president has proposed?
We have the most sophisticated financial examiners on the planet, and they're also the most dedicated folks on the planet in this particular space. We need to support them by providing them meaningful tools, resources, training, and at some point in time, when I started in practice in 1981, the IRS was a place that people wanted to go and earned their stripes, if you will, and then maybe some left for private practice, some certainly stayed. We need to get back to that, and the funding would certainly help us get to that level.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this, Commissioner Reddick. We need to fund the IRS to make sure that wealthy tax cheats pay what they owe. But we also need to fix our broken tax rules. Billionaires who pay a lower tax rate than public school teachers are freeloading, and we need to make it stop. The president's proposal for a minimum income tax on billionaires is about exactly that. And I'm with him on this. The American people are with him on this. Let's get it done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner, Nevadans are facing higher costs at the pump as the global supply chain recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic and other global factors we know. I've fought for a comprehensive approach and pushed for critical legislation to alleviate supply chain bottlenecks, led the charge for investments in clean energy, and called for really the Biden administration to develop a long-term government-wide strategy to lower gas prices. Senator Bennett and I sent a letter to you requesting that the IRS increase the standard mileage rate to better reflect the recent shock in gas prices and what businesses and some individuals are paying out of pocket every day. The letter was dated March 25th. And the reason being, and I know you're very aware of this, is that an increase in the per mile reimbursement rate will offer some relief to Americans who use a personal vehicle for everyday needs like work travel or medical transport. By enabling independent contractors and businesses to adjust for increasing expenses, it will also offer relief to families in need, particularly in rural areas, as well as help small businesses struggling with higher costs for transporting goods. My question to you is, if you receive the letter and then, as requested in the letter, will the IRS take action in raising the standard mileage rate to better reflect the actual costs that businesses and consumers are currently paying at the pump?
We did receive the letter. My first question was going to be whether we responded, but when you said March 25, I'm confident we have not responded.
Okay.
We have inventories in that lane as well, so I apologize for that. Let me take a look at that and get back to you as to the timing on that and see if we can't also accelerate the letter.
If you would,
Sure.
obviously,
And I appreciate
the sooner you act, the better for so many that are struggling right now and need the help because of the high prices that we're seeing. So let me jump to another request that I have for you, and it's another letter, but this letter was sent to you on March 2nd by Senator Rosen and I. We both of us have really worked to provide relief for our hospitality and restaurant industries throughout the COVID pandemic and its recovery. And I was able to ensure that our hotels and live entertainment businesses were eligible for PPP loans. I led a bipartisan legislation, which is called the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Relief Act and the Restaurants Act, to provide critical relief to these businesses and workers that are hardest hit by the pandemic. We know, and I know, the hospitality industry is really, in the leisure and travel, the last to come out of this. I want to acknowledge that the IRS, the work that you did for reducing the tip allocation rate during the COVID-19 pandemic, you actually reduced it by an average of 60% to assist our service sector businesses and tipped wages like those in the hospitality, travel, tourism industry, and in my home state of Nevada. Unfortunately, I just recently learned from some of our workers at the Culinary Union Local 226, the IRS raised the tip allocation rate at the beginning of 2022 during the peak of the Omicron variant. And while those in the food and beverage industry continue to face double the national unemployment rate while this industry continues to safely recover. So my question to you is, what was your reasoning for changing the tip allocation in January? And when you did so, did you take into account that many of the hardest hit businesses and workers in the industry are still trying to recover?
These agreements tend to be negotiated with individual employers, so I can't speak to any specific individual employer. But I am sensitive to the fact that if, in fact, in certain industries and certain communities, if we were, I find it hard to believe that our people on the ground who negotiate these would not be sensitive to that. They do live in these communities.
Well, here's my concern.
So I need to personally.
Yeah, please look at it, because here's my concern. Traditionally in the
I hear
past,
what
you
you're
consulted. The IRS consulted with employers, organized labor, and those affected by this industry and the impact because of COVID. But my understanding is that was done in the past, but it wasn't done this time. There was no consultation. And that's my concern is without the consultation, you don't realize that this industry is still hard hit. So if you would please take a look at this and work with our office, both mine and Senator Rosen's, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to say thank you again. It's been a long morning for you. You're always here. You respond whether it's on Zoom or in person, Commissioner. So thank you so much for joining us today. I believe that is it for the senators appearing. So just thank you again for joining the committee. Thank you for this discussion. I also want to remind my colleagues that questions for the record are due by close of business next Thursday, April 14th, and this committee hearing is adjourned.
Thank you very much.